Brilliant.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to speak to this kind of audience. I'm going to start just by showing you something. You won't have to read it for now. This is from the Financial Times today. It's by the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, and she says the city faces more than a few bad apples. Right? So in other words, all the problems we've got in the city are not because you've got a few odd people. It's something else. It's culture. So we've got something here that we need to explain, in this case banking, and the work I'm now doing is about banking. And what I'm interested in is how the hell they're all bad apples. Okay. And why they think it's right. I may get onto that later. I've got something to say about my background, that I started economics when I was 16 or something, and I went to Manchester to do economics, which is very lucky because it was the centre of anthropology. And I ended up, well, not the centre, a centre of anthropology, and I ended up reading Evans Pritchard, Gluckman, yes, lots of Gluckman. Also, they just started on Levi-Strauss, so we had somebody...
Leach.
Who?
Leach?
Yes, bits of Leach, Edward Leach, but a lot of functional, I think it's called functional, structural functionism, Radcliffe Brown, people like that. Okay, so in doing that, one of the people who me and my colleagues were as interested in was Evans Pritchard, who was a professor at Manchester, and he wrote a book called, I don't know if anybody reads it anymore, Witchcraft Amongst the Azandi. Is it still?
That's a classic.
I'm good.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. And an absolutely wonderful book. And a student, I read it all the way through and just thought, and we all did, we just thought this was amazing. And this is a long time ago, so you can criticise what I say, but I'm just telling you what I learned from it. That the Azandi were very sensible. That what they were doing with this witchcraft wasn't witchcraft in the way that we were supposed to think about it. It worked. They had a language that worked. That connected to something else that I understood about Evans Pritchard. This was word of mouth that we got about Evans Pritchard, that he was beginning to think that you had to do your own anthropology. In other words, what were you doing studying the Azandi? That the best anthropology of the Azandi should be in the Azandi language, and that the anthropology that we needed was here. That connects to another point. Talking to a friend at that point, John Merrington, who you do know, and he said to me, which I agreed with, and it struck me because of my history, their language is economics. So we've got to understand economics. So that's my background to doing economics. There's an interest in economics, and then a concern about economics, and at the centre of that concern is how we understand ourselves. Okay. Now there's something else about economics. It's not just another discipline. Because of its assumptions and also because of its centrality to this kind of an economy, it dominates. But it doesn't dominate simply because it's about money. It dominates also because it shapes the social disciplines. The alternatives to economics are as much formed by economics as economics itself. And what economics does is it poses a problem that people try to deal with, and in dealing with it, they recreate the ground of the problem. In other words, again, we have a culture. So the culture for me is something where problems create solutions that are the ground for the next set of problems. And there's a kind of continuing story. There's no jumping out. Although I think there is a jumping out. We'll get onto that. But we're locked into something. Okay? And even when we don't like it, we're locked into it because other people are going along with it. Here we are. We've got the bad apples. And they've recently brought the world economy down. And really every single bank was bust. Every single one of them was bust. And they were bust years before the actual crash. I've spoken to an accountant about this who's furious about it. Nobody listens to him. He gave a talk I heard recently and he's saying, look, they were functionally bust. Anyway, there's a culture. So I'm interested in that. And then, so what's the basis of the culture? Well, the reason that economics is not just another discipline is it makes a key assumption about the nature of the self, which of course anthropologists have a problem with, I believe. Everybody has a problem with, but the question is how you deal with that. And that assumption is that the self is a rational maximizer. And that runs through our culture in a whole series of ways. It's about how we think about ourselves as humans. It then forms the social disciplines, and the example I'm going to quickly give is economics and sociology. So when Durkheim is developing sociology, he's criticizing economics. And he's saying, well, economics, they deal with those bits where you're dealing with self-interest, but we've got to deal with this social world. And the way he gets round the problem of the individual self-interest is he says, what we've got to deal with is social facts. So we deal with the reality of the social, and then we can do sociology. His problem, of course, is that that doesn't get rid of economics. What he does is he sets up, and he's quite clear about this in certain points, he sets up a disciplinary division of labour. So on one side, economics will do the self-interest bit. On the other side, sociology will deal with how people come together, what kind of things are going on in that society. The trouble with that is that we've got two explanations of what's going on. And what Durkheim says is there are two, roughly he says there are two springs of action. On one side the self, and the other side the social. And that gives us this division of labour, which I think is problematic, which I will get on to. That division of labour, which Durkheim calls it two springs of action, because he doesn't want to get rid of economics. That's the worrying thing about what he's doing, for me. So in other words, here you are, economics, you're okay, but we're going to do this stuff. And by the way, then, if you look at the development of sociology, a relatively recent thing has been this turn to rational sociology based on the rational maximizer. In other words, they're going to recreate the economic thinking. A guy called Coleman does that. There's some other people who do that. There's also a move in economics then to explain social things through the rational maximizer. I don't know if you've heard these people, Gary Becker, people like that. Yeah. Yes, it's incredible stuff. Everything can be explained in terms of a rational maximizer. So if you end up with a division of labour, this is not a happy division of labour. There's no calm division between these two areas. They intrude, and particularly economics intrudes because it starts from an individual.
What's a rational maximizer? If it explains everything, can we know what it is, please?
Yes, I'll get on to it. Yeah. It's somebody who is a selfish rational maximizer. Just quickly, if I don't do it quite soon, do attack me again. Or not you attack me again, or whatever.
Do you feel attacked?
Sorry, it's badly put. Anyway, that division goes back to a problem in economics called Das Adam Smith problem. And it's based on the belief that Adam Smith wrote two completely different books. Wealth of Nations, which is all about the selfish side, and then he also wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And the Theory of Moral Sentiments is about morality, the social, an extraordinary book. And what they say is that he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments Then later he got into the Wealth of Nations, and then he was getting into the nitty-gritty there. Actually what he did is, after the Wealth of Nations, he went back to the theory of moral sentiments and carried on writing it. So he worked on it again and produced another edition before he died. So the last book he wrote, in the end, was also the theory of moral sentiments, because he had to rewrite bits. But he didn't get rid of his core idea, which I put in the piece of paper I've put round. Oh, not everybody's got one, I suppose, but just explaining that. I will try to get onto that, but I've got to get onto that. I'm about to do that, but I've just got to say what this division gives us is a division between the natural, which is self-interest, and the social, or the self and socialized. So we talk about a self that somehow acquires these characteristics. But when we talk about that self, we end up with this, what I call the default self. The basic understanding of the self that dominates our culture is the rational maximizer. So we better get a grip on that. Well, it comes from economics' claim to science. So what economics does is say what we're going to study is a particular problem, which is the problem of scarcity. So in other words, if I choose one thing, I have to give up on something else. It's called opportunity cost in economics. So I'm always choosing between something and something else. Because I'm giving up on things when I choose, I want to maximize. I want to get the best out of what's out there. So what economics is looking at is the allocation of scarce resources between these competing ends. So particularly then it's looking at allocation. And when you look at allocation, you're concerned, as I say, with this choice about things. Do I want two of these or one of these? Well, actually, I want two of them. That's a very simple way of understanding the rational maximizer. I want more. Now, economists do understand that you don't always want more of something because your satisfaction in things diminishes and then you switch to something else. So you're dealing with a whole series of goods and you're trying to maximize. Okay? That gives us the rational maximizer. Now the problem there is that what we do is we create a model to understand that. So we say the person is a rational maximizer. Then we go through a series of deductions to produce a model. So I don't know if anybody's done any economics, but you would have done some modelling. And you end up with supply and demand. So it's kind of reducing something that's incredibly complicated to something simple. And then you can build that simplicity into a slightly more complicated thing. So you go from supply and demand to general equilibrium. In other words, you can build a model of the whole economy based on markets. And the trouble there is that you've based it all on the rational maximizer. So you've understood the whole economy in terms of the rational maximizer. And this rational maximizer then is also understood as somebody who is selfish. In fact, lots of economists slip from what seems to be an assumption to a moral judgment. In other words, they see people, Kenneth Arrow, who is a Nobel Prize winner, describes the economy as driven by the forces of greed. Now you'll notice you've moved from a modelling assumption, rational maximizer, to something quite different, a moral judgment about human beings. So you've gone from modelling into the world. And that's one of the main problems of economics. It models, but the model is not safe. A proper laboratory has walls round it. You do an experiment in it, you look at it and you say, great, that happened. In the case of economics, they say they've got a laboratory, but actually the assumptions sneak out of the laboratory. They become wild within the economy. I will explain some of that. So that economic method gives us a distinction between positive and normative. This is positive. In other words, what economics says is this is like this. It's just a statement. But we're not going to do anything like this should be like this. So that's a very key distinction for economics. And for economics then, that's its claim to science. So you've gone from rational maximizer to a claim to science, and you deduce your model. It's all incredibly rigorous. I mean, when you teach economics, it drives you mad, this kind of rigor. But once you know it, I can teach some of these things in my sleep. I don't even have to believe it. I just have to go, it goes like this. So I can rush in and go blah, 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 like that. And if they get it wrong, I can say, well, no, it's like that. Opinion? Please. No. In fact, I also teach economics and ethics, so I do get some decent teaching where opinions matter. So there's that distinction. So that the thing about economics is it's scientific because it's excluded the moral, which for me is a very worrying idea. Okay. What kind of understanding of self-interest does this give us? Firstly, it's atomic. So the people are simply atoms. And they confront the social. But they themselves are just atomic. There's nothing to them except this rational maximizing. They can rational maximize what they like. That's up to them. You could have moral preferences. No problem. You could have immoral preferences. No problem. You can have just whatever you like. So from the economic point of view, the atomic person can be moral or not. So they could be moral. And economists would say, no, we're not saying there's no morality. But what they are saying is that morality is not necessary. It's not part of the makeup of people. It's just that some people like chocolate, other people like morality. Maybe some of us like both. But the point is that from the economic standpoint, it's not necessary. It's not necessary to have a moral point of view. The viewpoint that I'm developing is that morality is not just necessary, it's can you be more than necessary? Intrinsic is a good word for it. Yeah, it's absolutely what we are. We are moral from the heart. And I'll have to get on to that. But that's what we are. And because we're moral, we can sustain a number of social situations. All sorts of social situations, even in the same day. Not only across history, but in the same day, we can go from family to here to, whatever. All sorts of social situations. We've got that basic capacity as human beings, which I will explain more of. But I want to still say more about the problem of economics. So I said it's atomic, it starts from action. So the way it understands things is that I just need what I want. And by the way, you're beginning to get a picture now of the bad apples. All I have to do is maximize. What's more, if other people are saying the same thing, I've got a culture of people who are just maximizing. And in that kind of culture, anybody who's not maximizing is a mug. Did you hear what he did? He didn't maximize, to put it crudely. He had a deal in front of him, he didn't take it. He had scruples. That's not somebody who survives in the world of finance. I'll give you a quick example of that. There was a guy who protested about risk assessment in HBOS. He was the risk officer, so why not? And what did he do? He went and reported it to senior people. He is a senior person. And the woman who was the person who was doing sales leant across the table and said, "Don't fuck with me." That was it. That was the end of the story. He eventually left, and she, who was head of sales, became the risk officer. H-boss went bust because he was right. But the thing he was up against, it wasn't just her. It wasn't just her as a bad apple. It was the culture. It was this culture of this is what we're doing. And it starts from action. So, I might have to miss some of this. The problem then for economics is interaction. But they do try to deal with that. They try to deal with it in games theory. The problem with games theory is it all starts from the rational maximizer. And then they show the classic one, which I suspect everybody's heard of, is the prisoner's dilemma. But what you end up with is, with rational maximizers, is cheaters and cheaters. In other words, people don't cooperate in this game. I'm not going to explain it now, if necessary later. But in other words, people who are rational maximizers don't trust people who are rational maximizers. Because there's nothing social in them. You're expecting them to be opportunistic agents. And that phrase, opportunistic agents, occurs all the way through economics. It's now the basis of the governance of corporations in America and in this country. And it's called shareholder value. And it assumes, in this case, that managers are all opportunistic agents. They can't be trusted. So you then set up contracts to make sure they do the job. And it usually involves the share price. So now what you've got in America is the most incredible amount of share buybacks. So companies, decided by the CEOs, buy their own shares. Up goes the share price, usually just before the audit day for, yes, what a surprise, for their contract. So this is money and thinking about selfishness in a particular way that damages the system that produced it, because they don't invest. So there's piles of money now going into buyback. And when I say piles, it's one of those numbers I can't remember, because when I think about it, I think, no, it can't be that. It's in the billions per year. So it's a problem. So that's one of the problems then of this rational maximizer. You can't, there's no possibility of trust, there's no basis for trust. And I've just given you an example how the rational maximizer becomes real. I'm now going to treat these managers of companies as rational maximizers. Another thing from there is the managers then have to manage the company. So you now get personnel economics, which is again related to Becker. This is Chicago economics. And what happens there is you assume they're opportunistic agents. So you're now running the company on the basis of opportunistic agents. So you have to have contracts, incentives, deterrents, the whole series of ways of treating people. And if you're in work, you find a manager setting up some kind of incentive scheme for you to do a job. Now, sometimes people actually like doing their job, but boy, does this take it out of them.
It's got into all the universities.
It has.
Every single university. You're not allowed to enjoy your teaching or do it for love. It's got to be because you keep sanctioned otherwise.
Even in the NHS.
Yeah. It's all over the place. At the public service, but also in companies. But some companies have resisted it because what they're doing is too important. They want, if you're in Rolls-Royce, you want people who enjoy engineering. Because you don't want aeroplanes falling out the sky. When you're a public service, there's this basic lack of trust of these public people. What are they doing? They're not doing it for money. They're up to something or other.
Well, yeah. Like charities.
What?
They're like charities, not commercial.
Yeah, that's right. What are they doing? I mean, where's the attitude gone? So I ended up in a business school. I mean, it's just horrendous. So we've got these speeches about something called business, and business attitudes and ways of doing things in a business-like way. And it's all based on rational maximizing. And as you say, enjoy your teaching? For God's sake.
In my university, just before they sacked me, they changed the name of the library. And they call the library the trading floor.
Do I need to say more? Really?
How does that even make sense?
It doesn't, but it's this managerial talk that comes out of economics.
Is that like systems theory, the same kind of idea where you take out all the emotional content of a situation so that it becomes totally rational?
Well, I don't know enough about systems theory, but what you've just described is right. That you emotions, like loving what you're doing, being interested in what you're doing.
Because that makes you unpredictable as well. That makes you...
Yes, right, okay, so I'm going to skip a little bit. They do these games, but they also use these games sometimes to test what people do. And there's a game where they offer people the ability to control somebody else. It's only a game. It's not... There was the unfortunate episode, Zimbardo, I think it was, or one of... Yeah, okay. But this is a game, so you can... The person who you're controlling can do a certain amount of things for your benefit. And then it's left for you to determine what they do. I'm sorry if I haven't got that quite right, but you'll see what I mean, I think, when I explain what happens, is that people who control get predictable results. And they're always predictable at the level of control. People who don't control get more. It may not be predictable, but they get more. You get this voluntary participation from other people. And that's something I learned at work, going through these kind of regimes, where control, give less, give less, give less. You get more and more annoyed, get more and more fed up. Why should I stay here? Let's get out. That kind of production. So that's an example of rational maximising becoming real. Do I believe in the rational maximizer? I don't think that's what people are, but I do believe if you treat people like that, that's what you get. They may be pissed off rational maximizers, but they've become rational maximizers. They don't want to be. And I know that because we have all these conversations in the corridor about, what's that? Did you hear that? That kind of thing. And I've got to tell them about the trading floor. Because I think we missed a trip there. Wonderful. I say wonderful in a kind of a way. So there's this problem then, as I was referring to games theory. The problem in games theory is that you end up with this cheat strategy. And there's a big problem there is, how on earth do you really explain human beings on the basis of cheat? Because cheat means minimal gain and minimal gain. And when you look at these games, like the Prisoner's Dilemma, if everybody cooperates, guess what? Things are better. So how on earth can we explain cooperation on the basis of the rational maximizer? So there are these problems. But one thing you can do is you say, well, okay, the game is repeated. So you repeat the game, and if you repeat the game, then it's worth cooperating. There's various problems with that. One of them is, from the rational maximizing point of view, that when that game stops, that process is over, but if you know it's going to stop, a rational maximizer will cheat just before, because they'll get more by cheating. But if they're going to cheat on that round, the other one's going to cheat the one before, and you end up, it all goes back to cheating. The trouble is with that, if you go to evolution, what do you find? I call it evolution, nature. You find cooperation even between species. So these things have evolved. Okay, so there's
it's conditional. There is some cooperation and there is some conflict.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I mean, I like the example. Yes, I like the example of the fish. The barbers. Yes, the cleaning fish. So in a particular place, carnivorous fish turn up. I call them carnivorous to make the story, and they circle and wait. And they come down and then they get cleaned by these smaller fish, which go into their mouths. It's great to see. That is an example of cooperation. So somehow or other those things come about. Okay? And I would have thought human beings were a bit better at it than fish. Just, that's just my thought. But maybe I'm wrong. But let's get on to that. So I'm interested then in how people do that. So what a guy called Kenneth Binmore does is he plays around with these games as a kind of thought experiment. And he says, well, okay, supposing we have these games played and we have perfectly rational players, multiple perfectly rational players. In fact, in this case, more rational than us. So he says we're going to use Turing machines in this thought experiment. In other words, perfect calculating machines. And he says, okay, let's get them all playing each other. And effectively what happens is, so to speak, this is a thought experiment, but just imagine it. You leave them there to do this. You go away, you come back, and what's happening is they're still all whirring. They're going, what's going on? Because they're perfectly rational, they've worked out that if the other one does A, they've got to do B. But if they do B, the other one's going to do C. If the other one's going to do C, the best option is D. But if that's D, then I've got to do E. What's more, you've got multiple players, and they're all perfect rationalizers. So this process just goes on and on and on and on. In other words, the conclusion here is that rationality is not the basis of action. You cannot act purely on the basis of rationality. I'm not saying there isn't rationality. I'm not saying it wouldn't be very handy to be rational. What I am saying, using this as an example, but if you think about it, it works. You can't do action on the basis of rationality because action actually is interaction. And the problem with economics is it starts off as, I'm just going to do this action, but actually every action is an interaction and involves somebody else. At that point, you've got to be able to deal with that somebody else. What Binmore does is he says, well, to solve this problem, I'm going to make all these Turing machines imperfect. In other words, their rationality will somehow be interrupted. And then, and then they all know the other imperfections, so then they can work out what to do, and they reach a result. Okay, but the trouble with that is it still doesn't get to human beings. Although he's saying this is how morality develops. In other words, this is how we become social beings. The problem here is again economics. He's assuming that the whole process, and this he's explicitly taking an evolutionary model, he's assuming that the evolutionary model starts from a rational maximizer. So that the basis is simply a selfish entity of some kind. And this you will find all the way through. You will find this even in evolutionary theory, this anthropomorphist view of non-human entities.
It's called selfish gene.
One's selfish gene. So he tried to, that's Dawkins, he refers to the selfish gene, and then he says, no, he says. But he also refers to the gangster gene. Well, excuse me. A gene is not a gangster, a gene is not selfish. Later on he says it's the cooperative gene. A gene is not cooperative either. A gene is just a gene, it's not got any intention at all. You might as well say a stone in a pile is cooperative. I know genes do connect with each other, but this is not cooperation. If I'm cooperating, I say to you, we're going to do this, how shall we do it? Genes do not do that. Was that a hand?
No, well, no, but we need to discuss this later on.
We'll have a go at you later.
We'll have a go.
Gangsters.
I mean, to be fair to Dawkins, he never
Anthropological
talked about genes
gangsters.
having intentions of any kind.
No, but he refers to a gangster gene.
Well, he's trying to use metaphors to
I
make
know.
his point. But I mean,
Yes.
I know they're dangerous, but to be fair to him, he never says genes are replicators. They replicate
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
A gene that replicates competition isn't a gene in a few generations. those points have been very valuable, actually.
Yeah, no, I'm not against evolution.
Okay.
What I'm concerned about is the
I am.
placing into evolution.
I'm
This-
sorry, I don't want to... You just carry
Yes,
on. We
let's
have
carry
to make
on.
up. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted.
No, it's okay. But the point I'm making is that even if he's using a metaphor, why is he using that one? Why do you call a gene a gangster? Why do you call it selfish? And then to correct it, why do you say it's cooperative? All three words are bad. They are bad metaphors. It's just a replicator. There's some chance, etc. Okay, I'm not going to go into all that. Anyway, okay. What we've got in economics, and it spreads throughout all the social subjects, is this idea of a default self. But at heart, there is just this selfish maximizer. It's pervasive. Once you've become aware of it, you will see it everywhere. Somebody will just casually say, well, you know what people are like. Oh yeah, we all know what people are like. They're just selfish. Where do we get that from? Many cultures, people don't think that at all. We do here. It's very difficult to avoid. Even when we say it's not true, the fact that we have to say it's not true, we're already stuck into a game. It's a two-card trick we're stuck in. Choose one or the other one. We're stuck in this kind of game. Okay? But there are problems that economics has, that some economists have pointed out, that there's so many things in the economic world that are not the subject of maximisation. For example, there's no way you can maximise on which side of the road to drive. What you really want is to drive on the same side as everybody else. If you thought you preferred the right to the left and everybody was on the left, you'd just be a lunatic. Or reaching old age. Going the wrong way down the motorway. I'm looking forward to that moment. That is not rational maximising. There's a whole series of things that hold us together. One of them, of course, is language. How do we make language work? We don't make it work by maximising. We might want to use it in some way to maximise. And language requires a whole series of conventions and ways of understanding things. And the key thing is understanding what other people mean. And that is also about understanding that they understand, that you understand what they mean. So we've got that series of interaction which is vital for all of these conventions that hold us together. And there are many of them. Okay. So I've got some examples from economics of where this rational maximizer falls down. I don't know what time I've got, but shall I do?
About 15, possibly 20 minutes.
Okay, I'll do one example. I gave the control example. There's another one. You may have heard of this. If anybody's read some kind of popular economics, you might have come across the ultimatum game. And economists do this. And it became part of what's called experimental economics. And experimental economics has been very interesting because it's been testing the self. I have to say the self it's testing is the rational maximizer. And there's a problem there. But they have been testing it. And the ultimatum game is one of the examples. So the way it works is you have two players, and the first player has 10 somethings. So we call them good things. Monies, if you like, but they have 10 of them. And there's another player who they can distribute the 10 to in whatever distribution they wish. The other player can then accept, in which case they take that distribution, or reject, in which case they both lose out. So, testing the rational maximizer. I'll just run through this. Usually I like to ask people how they would do this, but I'm not going to now. But most of you would say 4. I'm just you probably, oh yeah, I'll give 4. Okay? Not necessarily, but most of you would give 4. And I would have done. What happens? In economics, what economics says is, well, if you've got the 10, all you need to do is give the other one 1. Because what you've given them is a choice between 0 and 1. And a rational maximizer prefers 1 to 0. So they would choose 1. They would take the 1. And the rational maximizer, why should they give 2 when they're losing out on 1 doing that? So they would just offer 1. So the rational maximizing prediction is the offer is 1 and it's accepted.
Yeah, but why should they offer anything if they're that selfish?
If you offer nothing, the other one rejects. Then they're both out.
Oh, I see.
So you've got to offer something. Okay? So you offer the 1. That's what you're meant to do. But I've already told you, actually that's not what people do. They offer 4. What's more, people who are offered 1 reject it. And they don't just reject it, they reject it with a bit of a kind of, oh yeah.
Did you know that monkeys do as well?
Oh, have you seen Edward de Waal?
Yeah.
France.
Sorry, Edward de Waal is somebody else, that's right. Yeah. There's a lovely film of the Capuchins. This is relevant. The Capuchins who they're fed, and they're given a piece of cucumber. They have to give a stone, and they get a piece of cucumber. Lovely, you know. So, and they like a cucumber. And then these experimenters, I don't know if they signed any ethics forms doing this. They give one of the Capuchins, when they hand over the stone, they give him a grape. Then the trouble starts. You get this other one who's given a cucumber, which, by the way, they were happy with before. You know, choice of 0 or a piece of cucumber, no problem. Choice of me with a piece of cucumber and that one with a grape, not so good. And it's, if you go onto TED Talks, you can see this, and the whole series of other examples. He's one of my heroes that helps me in my work. And the key thing there is that context matters. It's not enough simply to look at a choice between 0 and 1. So when you're looking at a choice between 0 and 1, where the 1's come out of 10, oh no, that's not so good. That strikes me as unfair. So we have an idea of something that's unfair. In order to have an idea of something that's unfair, I have to think you're like me. But how on earth can I think you're like me if I'm a rational maximizer? A rational maximizer doesn't have that view. A rational maximizer has no context. And the significance of the source of the rational maximizer in allocation is that when you look at a problem of allocation, which is the economic problem, you take away from all other context, which I would just summarize as issues of reproduction. And in issues of reproduction, how things carry on, how we keep things going, fairness matters. It really does matter. So the reaction of the Capuchin, I mean, I'm sorry, but whenever I show my students this, we're all laughing because we can see ourselves in the Capuchin and this kind of, and the Capuchin chucks the cucumber back, really, really angry, trying to chuck it at the experimenter as well. You know,
It's an excellent description of the class struggle over wages, isn't it?
well, it's about as a stone is the wage. There's one beautiful moment where the Capuchin gets the stone and goes to the wall and tests it. Have I got the wrong stone? And then finds it's the right kind of stone and then hands it over and still gets a cucumber. And he enjoyed the cucumber before, but not anymore. Would you want to eat cucumber when everybody else is eating grapes? I don't think so. Anyway, so okay. So in the ultimatum game, what's discovered again and then again and again is that people aren't rational maximizers. And in fact, you can start playing around with this game. If you divide up 2, people accept the 1. No problem. If you're dividing up 3, well, okay. 4, things are getting... 10, definitely we don't like that. And there's a whole series of other games where this has been tested. And again and again and again, what we discover is people aren't rational maximisers. There's something else going on. They have a sense of what's right. Not as something that's added on, but as something that's absolutely intrinsic in some way. Of course, these are games. I understand that. But these games were set out to test the rational maximizer, and they failed to discover it. And they've gone into, they even did a version where they said, okay, getting a bit desperate, supposing it's not an ultimatum game, you just decide the distribution. And they can't accept or reject, they just take whatever I give you. In that case, it's true the offer goes down, but there's still an offer that's significant over long periods with many different people that's above 1. It still goes on. There's still this, oh well, I'll give you 3, 4, whatever. So it's still a problem. Even when they're trying to find a situation in which somebody will act as a rational maximizer. And then they're desperate about it. I mean, in some of the examples, they're so bizarre that you're not going to find them in the world anyway. It's just, you're not going to get it. There's other games you can play with that. You can mess, once this starts, so you can mess around. You say, well, you lot, I'm just going to start the game soon, and you lot, you're in that room, you're in that one. And then you can leave around different forms of literature, just casually. One lot is about being nice, the other lot will be some kind of self-help or something like that. Some kind of little articles about self-help and getting on. Those people will tend to be less generous. The people who've read the other thing will be more generous. Again, it's just context. It's how we've been led into thinking about these issues. We're thinking about what's right. And when you're thinking about what's right, you think, oh, I'll do that. And another example is somebody tested, I can't remember the whole experiment, but they were testing how people reacted to a situation. And then they had a control on it. And what they showed is that people act in a self-interested way because they think it's right. Even though, actually, when you take them away and discuss it, they don't think it's the right thing to do. In other words, self-interest becomes a moral norm.
You mean people are being conditioned through
Yeah.
advertising, for example?
Well, no, it's worse than that. Advertising is part of it, but
Yeah.
it's the core of our culture.
Yeah.
It's
You don't want to be a mug.
exactly. You don't want to be a mug. And you feel, this is a guy called Miller, I think he's Thomas Miller, and he just tests self-interest and it comes out, well, yeah, it's there. It's a moral norm. And if it's a moral norm, what we're dealing with is moral people. It's just that in this case, we have self-interest. And that's the city. All these people learn economics, they get the culture of economics. Even if they haven't actually done a degree, it's all about rational maximising. Okay, so those games, I'm going to have to leave some of them. The trouble with the testing is it doesn't tell us where the rational maximizer came from. It just arrives, we get to test it, and nor does it tell us what the alternative is. So you can carry on testing and testing and testing, but all you're testing is the rational maximizer. And the testing doesn't lead to, you can reject things, you learn from things, but in the end you need something else to test. So there's a problem there. I mean, the great thing about the Hadron Collider is somebody came up with the idea of this Higgs boson particle. Then you could test it, but you had to have that to test. Mm-hmm. And the trouble with what's happening in economics is, in the end, the only thing they can test is the rational maximizer. Then they say it doesn't work. Then they say, oh. So then what they do is they fall back on, there's something called behavioural economics, where they fall back on evolutionary theory, and they say, oh, well, we used to be a prey animal. Now, I'm not disputing that, but I really have a problem that because we used to be a prey animal, we have financial crises. I don't think that really works. I have a problem with that. For example, if prices are falling and I'm in the markets, it's probably a good time to sell. But no, it's evolutionary theory. I have this herd instinct. But by seeing everybody else is selling, I know prices are going down. Let me try and get out of the market. And that's what a crash is, everybody trying to get out of the market. I'm not disputing there are this background for people, and they do show, it's quite interesting, they've interrupted traders and extracted some of their blood and then investigated it. And they find that they are in high hunting mode. I've forgotten the name of the hormone, but they are absolutely buzzing. Pardon?
Testosterone.
There's something else as well. Yes. There's something else, I can't remember, but it's that kind of thing. And they are lit up. And continuously lit up. So these things are there. But they're not lit up because they've got this hormone. It's the activity that leads to them developing this capacity of being able to be at this high level for such a long time. Some of them just burn out. And it doesn't matter, but the rule now is you have to be broken away from that activity, because the more you do that, the less you look at risk as a problem, because you feed on your success, and those people become very dangerous. In fact,
is it to do with the amount
they
of coke they
become
snort
bad
as well?
apples. Sorry?
I said, is it to do with the amount of coke they snort as well?
I can't. It used to be, but they don't need that to do this. I suspect that coke is a kind of leveller. You've gone through this day where you've been trading millions, and you've got to act now. You can't say, what should I do now? What do you think? You've got to do it like that. And you've got to decide it's the right thing. And that gives you this kind of mentality, but you're doing it the whole time. So I would imagine that coke is a kind of, into the toilets, sniff. In fact, I think they even gave up on going into the toilets in the end. They just did it wherever they wanted. That was in the 80s, which was quite incredible. So there's a problem there. Another problem. So where does the rational maximizer come from? It does come from economics. Its foundation, though, is money. And I can't develop this completely now, but if you look at the origin of money, it comes with the origin of philosophy. That's quite interesting. I think, I know another talk I heard here, which is Seaford. Now, I think his work is very good. So I find that very helpful. So you get this origin of money, and at the same time, and I don't think he develops this one, but I think it is part implicit in what he's saying, you get the development of something called sophism. Not philosophy, sophism. And the thing about sophism is it is about persuasion. In other words, what's right is what I can persuade you of. Another view in there is that the sophist will go somewhere and work for money. So the knowledge, the sophism, that's knowledge, is what I can use to get money. And what's more, I'm good at it. So a good sophist can go around the Greek islands, different cultures, and train people to win, to be right. And that is the origin of philosophy, because it creates a problem. What kind of society you're going to have. One of the things that the sophists say is, when people are watching you, you abide by convention. When they're not, you abide by your natural instincts. So we're right back to the rational maximizer and the social and this division. So the witness is there, very important. The problem is that if you run a society where when you're being watched you go by convention, but whenever you can get away with it, you do, you've got no basis. And this is a problem in the whole of economics as well. It's what, in fact, Franz de Waal calls veneer theory. That what you've got is a social, and underneath it, this nature read in tooth and claw, which is now gripped onto economics as the rational maximizer, this idea that beneath it all, we're just these selfish, natural, non-social beings, which then puts all our social arrangements at risk. In fact, all our social arrangements then appear to be inauthentic, and our commitment is not genuine. And that, I told you about shareholder value. I like that example because this isn't about people running a voluntary association. This is about a corporation. And they're treated as if they do not take the corporation purpose seriously. Okay, right. And that, the irony of that is that it destroys the system itself. It holds the system back. I mean, one of the things that's happening there is that as they do more share buybacks, as there is this attitude about the selfish and so on, so we've also got inequality spreading and spreading and spreading, stretching out to the most extraordinary degree, where you end up with people who've got too much money. How do we know they've got too much money? Because they can't get rid of it. They try to find ways of getting rid of it. Somebody then says, why don't you buy these package mortgages? So I'm going to take these mortgages, and by the way, where did I get them from? I sold them to people who can't afford to have mortgages. It's called subprime mortgages. I will then, the whole story is horrendous.
Yeah.
And it's selfish to selfish. So I'm going to sell these mortgages, I'll package them up, I'll sell them to you, and you'll then sell them to the rich guy who's looking for returns because they've got so much money they cannot get rid of it. It's extraordinary. And there's this hunt for returns, which then leads to bubbles. And in fact, that's the crash. Did they suffer? No, they did not.
We do.
Yes, yeah, we know where it all ends up. So the problem does not go away. So that's there's this problem, enduring problem of veneer theory, the inauthentic attitude towards the social. In fact, the social, for some, doesn't even exist. It's just me doing this.
But the social does exist when they have to bail them out. That's the problem. Because
Well-
that's where the social comes in for them.
What they would say is it's not the social, this is just another game in which you're afraid to lose, so you put in money. I'm just saying that. I agree with you, but the problem, you see, with this distinction between selfish and social is that the answer is always to say that people are social or the social exists. And the problem is that if we don't rethink the self, we always end up with the self as a rational maximizer. Even though, that's the problem I was indicating with Durkheim. I just take him as an example. Fantastic work. But he preceded it by saying, effectively, I'm going to ignore economics. It's got a problem, economics, but I'm now going to go and do this. And then that work is fantastic. But this is still here. That's the default self. That comes back. Okay, so it's a problem. So I've got other examples. I better rush on. How do we get out of this? So I've put it on the sheet. So actually it goes back to Adam Smith. And Adam Smith was talking about sympathy. And actually you can trace this from Adam Smith back to Darwin. Because Darwin reads Adam Smith, not just The Wealth of Nations, he reads the theory of moral sentiments. So he reads about sympathy. So he's concerned about sympathy. Right, what's sympathy? It's very simply a sense of organic connection. That's one view, one way of putting it. It's a fellow feeling. So today we might say empathy. So right to the basis of the foundation of what we call economics, there's somebody talking about feeling. And for Adam Smith, feeling was crucial. Not just, oh, that's so interesting. They have feelings. That's very nice. Now let's go on and look at self-interest. No, for him, feeling was the basis of any kind of interaction. And this is how we're intrinsically social, because of our feeling. So the way it works for Adam Smith is, if I have feelings and you have feelings, I can have a fellow feeling. I might be wrong, by the way, but I go into a room and I immediately, Smith says this is not something, I'm not thinking, I don't know what they're sort of feeling now. It's like that. It varies, as we get through life, we develop various ways of doing this, but the first thing is just this supposition, oh, they're feeling something. And you're not even thinking. It's immediate, it's at the level of your inner core. Somebody to look at there is Antonio Damasio, who's a neuroscientist who's very interesting. He describes the development of a self on a kind of neuroscientific basis. What do I say? Anyway, but feelings is a part of a coordinating mechanism. So you have, if you poke an anemone, see an enemy, it reacts. That's the first level of feeling, if you like, emotion. And then you get these upper coordinating mechanisms, and one of them is feelings. And then if you take that a bit further, I'm coordinating myself through my feelings. But so are you. I've got an idea how you're doing that, so I can then get a sense of your feeling. When I've got that, this is called fellow feeling or sympathy, I have an idea of how you will react to what I do. I know what my act means to you. In other words, we start from interaction. And that interaction then enables us to act. So from the point of view of Smith, it's that basis of sympathy that allows us to act. That is the same thing in Franz de Waal, when he's talking about the apes. He says, because the interesting thing about apes is they don't speak. There are noises, and I know there are some communications, but you can't do clear communication as an ape, and yet they coordinate. And his argument is that part of this coordination is sympathy, this sense of feeling. And from that you get a sense of what other people are thinking about you. You may be wrong, but when you're wrong, you learn. And you have an inherently... I better stop. You have an inherently learning self.
No, finished, but we normally stop about that. But
Oh, do you?
Don't stop it. Make sure you finish properly.
Okay. Just quickly then, so the key to understanding this issue, this is one way to get out of it, is to remember not motives. When you look at self-interest, it's all about motives. And then people will say, well, people have good motives. And the trouble is you get back into what we call veneer theory. They may have good motives, but is that just something they're fooling you about? It's just to rely on good motives to explain any kind of society is a problem. How do you... how motives are not enough. And the point that's happening in Smith is he's saying we're talking about a competence. And once you've got a competence, you've got a much firmer idea of how any kind of social situation develops. And that's the point about sympathy. It's a competence, it's not a motive. There is this kind of, some people in behavioural economics, they call, people are sympathetic as if it was a motive. No, they've lost it. Because the moment you get onto motives, the economist is waiting for you. And they'll say, yeah. But ultimately, what are we? We're self-interested. If you go to competence, you've then got a different kind of self. And the significant thing about that is once you've got competence as the basis, it enables us to be self-interested. But now that self-interest has to be understood in a different way. Not as rational maximising. We're all self-interested. Of course we are. It's mad to think we're not. What's damaging is to think that self-interest is just rational maximising. That's what's damaging. That's what ends up with this world where we can't discuss things properly. This guy called Judd, I don't know how you pronounce it, JUDT says the problem is we can't discuss things anymore. And the basis of that is that the culture is gripped onto an idea of self-interest as rational maximising. So you end up saying, oh, we've got to have the state. Oh, no, we've got to have the market. No, we've got to have the state. You're flicking around between these positions. And the significance of going towards competence is that you've now got a basis for understanding any social situation, including, by the way, the market. Markets can operate on the basis of this, but not in this form. That's a dangerous... Well, it comes out of sympathy, actually, because they've created their own culture, where they think it's all right. The trouble is, of course, it's destroying everybody else, which is a very bad form of a selfish culture. Okay, I'll stop.